I wanted to make a quick video about the sweeping new law set to impact virtually every small business owner in America. It's really amazing because non-compliance could send you to prison for up to 2 years and you don't even know about this law. It's called the Corporate Transparency Act, and it was enacted by Congress on January 21st of 2021. What is it and why was it passed? Well, this new law requires that beneficial owners report their interests in an LLC or a corporation. Congress believes that many entities are being formed to be used in money laundering schemes, terrorist financing, corruption, tax fraud, and other illicit activity. In reality, in my opinion, it's just another burden placed upon the small business owners of America by the federal government. Who does this law apply to? Well, it applies to beneficial owners. So the next question is, well, who is a beneficial owner? What does that mean? Well, the statute defines it as any individual that owns more than 25% of the company. Well, that sort of makes sense. That's not that hard to define. But then it goes on to say, or any individual who directly or indirectly exercises substantial control over the company. And I think this is where it gets kind of gray and a little bit murky. So the example that I thought of was, let's say you have a construction company that the shares are all owned by the wife because they want to qualify as a female-owned business, but in reality, the husband runs the day-to-day operations of the business, and the wife really isn't all that involved. Well, I think in that situation, since the husband is exercising direct or indirect substantial control over the company, I think he's a beneficial owner under the statute, and his name and identity would need to be disclosed. I think it gets pretty murky, though, when you have an example where you have perhaps an absentee owner who has a CEO, CFO, manager, president, chairman of the board running a company, but they don't actually own 25% or more of the shares. I think that person is then going to be considered a beneficial owner under the statute, and their identity will need to be, disclosed to the government under the Corporate Transparency Act. I think that's going to be really a problem. I can see a lot of problems coming down the road with regard to that. You're going to have employees where they're being called a beneficial owner to the federal government. They're going to think they have an ownership interest in the company when maybe they don't. They might get kind of squirrely or nervous or anxious about their identity being disclosed to the federal government for purposes of being a beneficial owner. They might feel like they might have some responsibility if things go wrong. As usual, Congress has passed a law without considering the consequences. So who else has to comply with the law? Well, anyone who helps form the corporation or LLC has to comply with the law. So lawyers, non-lawyers, CPAs, individuals who create their own entities, for example. And there's an interesting carve out, and that is for the 851 largest public accounting firms in America. They don't have to comply. Was that a political payoff? Was that due to lobbying activity? I think so, but hard to say. It just seems rather odd that only the 851 largest public accounting companies don't have to comply with the law. Very odd indeed. So when does the law go into effect? Well, January 1st, 2024, not any sooner. So you're going to have to comply. If you have a new entity, you're going to have to comply within 14 days. If you have an old entity, you're going to have, when the law goes into effect, you're going to have up to 1 year to comply. And if ownership changes in any way, including address changes, you're going to have 30 days. But remember the beneficial owner test, where direct or indirect substantial control, if that changes, you're only going to have 30 days. And I think that's going to be hard for the average person to interpret. Well, when does what does exercise direct or indirect substantial authority or control even mean? I'm not sure. I think we're going to have to wait for the regulations to define that further for us. Who do I report to and how do I comply? Well, you're going to reply to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, also known as FinCEN. The infrastructure to report has not been created yet. Expect it to be a rocky start, much like the Obamacare website. If current FinCEN filing is any example, it's not going to be the simplest process in the world. Probably should be, but the federal government doesn't have a strong track record in creating good websites. What are the penalties for the failure to comply? Well, $500 a day, up to $10,000, or up to 2 years in prison. Seems kind of harsh to me. Who do I expect to comply? At first, virtually nobody, because I don't think anybody's going to know. The law has been out for over 18 months at the time of this recording. I just heard about it within the last few months. I don't think very many business owners are going to be able to comply because I don't think they're going to know about it. But I want my clients and my viewers to do so to prevent the catastrophic consequences in the last slide. $10,000 fine and or up to 2 years in prison. Really harsh. What specific information will be required? Well, your business name, your current address, the state of formation of the entity, the employer identification number of the entity, the names of the individual beneficial owners, including those who directly or indirectly exercise substantial authority or control. So that could change depending on if people are hired, fired, that kind of thing. Their dates of birth, their address, and a copy of your government issued ID. I'm actually a user of a government program called ID Me. I had to upload my driver's license about 8 times in order for the software to recognize it, and there was no real reason. It's just the software just doesn't work very well. Who will have access to this information? Well, allegedly only law enforcement will have access to this information. But if the way that the IRS keeps taxpayer data confidential is any measure, and I think it's a pretty good example, then I think there's going to be leaks galore in this new system, because it doesn't seem like we punish people, government officials, bureaucrats, for leaks. It's just considered one of the, something that's bound to happen. Who is exempt from the requirement of reporting under the Corporate Transparency Act? Well, I believe that the target's actually you, the small business owner. But the following types of companies are exempt. Regulated companies such as banks. This sort of makes sense. I mean, if you're going to form a bank, there's all kinds of disclosure requirements, and the identities of the shareholders are not really secret. The second carve out is really rather interesting to me, and that would be companies with more than 20 employees and more than $5 million in annual revenue. This one has me scratching my head, because if you have 20 employees and $5 million in annual revenue, then you don't have to report under the Corporate Transparency Act. It doesn't make any sense. It seems rather arbitrary. It doesn't seem to make sense that you're going to be less likely to engage in money laundering and drug trafficking and terrorist activity. I think this was another requirement or a part of the statute that was actually impacted by lobbying. That's my best guess. The last requirement, or the last exemption, is companies which are dormant. That means not active in a trade and business. So that would be like a shelf company, a shelf corporation, where the entity has been formed, you're paying the annual fees to the state, but you're not conducting business in it. You're not going to have to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. I would suggest you probably just should, because the penalties for failure are going to be so strict. Now, why did I tell you about the Corporate Transparency Act? Well, I'm a tax attorney. I engage primarily in tax planning. This is not a tax law, but I believe it to be tax adjacent. I mean, it's pretty close. You're dealing with the FinCEN. You're dealing with a financial crime potentially, which I think is very strongly analogous to tax planning and complying with the tax code. I mean, you didn't even know about this law until you watched this video, most likely, and you could face up to 2 years in prison for not complying. Seems rather harsh. The tax code is lengthy, complex, boring, and changes all the time. The last stat that I had read was, if you actually read the tax code Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, it would take you over 80 years to read the entire tax code. That's a lot of information. At Taxed, we actually help you take advantage of the tax code so you can stop overpaying on your taxes. If you're interested in learning more about tax planning and how you could save thousands or tens of thousands of dollars potentially in tax planning, you can visit our website at tax.co. Make sure to take the tax quiz there. Thanks for watching.